Welcome to Libeth. Today we enter a text so small it can be read in a single sitting, and yet so durable that it has survived 8 centuries without losing its force. Hojoki was written in 1212 by Kamo no Chōmei, a failed court poet and eventual Buddhist recluse who watched Kyoto burn, flood, starve, collapse, and rebuild around him. Out of those disasters, he constructed a hut barely 10 feet square, and inside that hut, he wrote one of the foundational works of Japanese reflective prose. The Hōjōki is not simply a meditation on impermanence. It is an attempt to discover what remains of human life once ambition, stability, social status, and even the illusion of permanence have fallen away. The opening line is this: the flow of the river is ceaseless, and its water is never the same. That sentence is not an introduction. It is the entire argument. Everything that follows, the fires, the famine, the earthquakes, the hut, the final unanswerable question, is elaboration on what that sentence already contains. The river moves without stopping. The water in it is always different water. You are looking at the same river, and you are looking at something that has never existed before and will never exist again. And if that is true of rivers, it is true of houses, cities, ambitions, empires, and people. Chōmei understood this not as a philosophical position he had arrived at through reading, but as something he had watched happen repeatedly to the city he lived in, the career he had tried to build, and the world that had formed him and then dissolved around him. He was not a monk by nature. He was a court poet and the hereditary heir to a position at the Kamo shrine, one of Kyoto's most important religious institutions. He was talented. His poems were included in imperial anthologies, which was the measure of literary success in his world. He wanted the life that his birth and his talent seemed to have prepared for him: the position, the recognition, the ordered world of the Heian court. What he got instead was a court official blocking his inheritance, a city that burned and starved and shook 5 times in his adult life, a political order collapsing around him as warrior clans dismantled the aristocratic world from the outside, and eventually, a 10-foot hut on a mountain where he lived alone and wrote the book we are discussing. The text is called the Hōjōki. Hojo means 10 feet square. Kai means record or account. The title is the hut. The hut is the argument. It belongs to a Japanese literary form called zuihitsu, which translates roughly as following the brush, meaning the writer follows the movement of thought wherever it goes, without imposing a predetermined structure. The pillow book of Sei Shonagon is zuihitsu. The essays in Idleness of Kenko, written about a century after Chōmei, is zuihitsu. But the Hōjōki is unusual within the form because it is not actually meandering. It has a shape. It moves from outside to inside, from the world to the self, from documentation to reflection to self-interrogation, and the movement is deliberate. It begins with a river. It ends with a question Chōmei cannot answer about himself. Between those 2 points, it builds an argument that is one of the most compressed and honest accounts of what it means to live in an unstable world that has ever been written. The structure is worth knowing before you read it. The first part is a catalog of 5 disasters that Chōmei witnessed in Kyoto: a great fire, a whirlwind, an attempted relocation of the capital, a famine that killed tens of thousands, and a major earthquake. He describes these with the precision of a journalist and the stillness of someone who has already understood what they mean. The second part traces his successive dwellings, each smaller than the last, each further from the center, as a kind of autobiography told through architecture. The third part describes the hut itself, its dimensions, its contents, its location, its portability, the life he lives inside it. The fourth part is a meditation on the pleasures of that life, the music, the seasons, the solitude. And the fifth part is a sudden reversal, a question directed at himself. Is his love of the hut itself a form of attachment he has not escaped? He asks this. He does not answer it. The book ends there. The biography behind the book matters, because the book is not abstract. Chōmei was born sometime around 1155 into a family that had served the Kamo shrine for generations. His father died while he was young, which weakened his position within the family network before the world had a chance to do it from outside. He was a serious poet, serious enough that his work appeared in the Senseishi, an imperial anthology, which was a meaningful form of recognition in a world where poetry was not entertainment, but a primary mode of social and spiritual expression. He wanted to succeed his father in the position at the shrine. He did not. A court official intervened, the succession was blocked, and Chōmei spent years in a kind of suspended ambition before eventually taking Buddhist vows around 1204. He built the famous 10-foot hut on Mount Hino around 1209. He wrote the Hōjōki in 1212, at roughly 57 or 58 years old. The point is that the book is not written from a position of comfortable philosophical distance. It is written from the position of someone who wanted the world and was refused it, who watched the world he wanted repeatedly destroyed, and who eventually made something out of that refusal and that destruction that was not bitterness and not resignation, but something more difficult and more interesting. A kind of clarity that only becomes available once you have stopped expecting the world to be other than it is. The themes that run through it are not complicated to name, though they are difficult to fully receive. Impermanence is the central one, Mujo in Japanese, the Buddhist recognition that nothing persists. That change is not an interruption of stability, but the fundamental condition of all things. The disasters are not evidence that something went wrong. They are evidence of what is always happening, made visible. The hut is not a symbol of defeat or poverty. It is a demonstration of sufficiency, an argument made in wood and dimensions that a human life requires far less than the world teaches you to want, and that what remains when you have removed the excess is not emptiness, but something that might actually be enough. And the final self-interrogation, the question about whether his attachment to the hut is itself a form of the attachment he tried to leave behind, is what keeps the book honest. It refuses to be a success story. It refuses to be a guide. It is one person's attempt to think clearly about an unstable world, and its final gesture is the acknowledgement that the thinking is not complete. There are Western parallels worth mentioning, not to flatten the differences, but to give some coordinates. Thoreau's Walden, written 6 centuries later, is the most obvious, the deliberate experiment in reduced living, the precise measurement of what a life actually costs, the philosophical claims made through the account of a small house. Both texts end in ambivalence, which is part of what makes them trustworthy. Marcus Aurelius writing to himself about what can and cannot be governed. Pascal's observation that all human unhappiness comes from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Chōmei sat quietly in a room alone and found that even that was not finally quiet. These are not the same tradition, but they are circling the same problem. The Hojoki is 10 pages long. It was written 800 years ago. It has never stopped being relevant because the river in the first sentence is still moving, and the water in it is still never the same. The introduction to the Hojoki matters because it frames the entire work as lived philosophy rather than abstract doctrine. Chōmei does not begin with theory and then look for examples. He begins with catastrophe, disappointment, displacement, and instability, and only afterward asks what kind of life can honestly exist inside such a world. The river in the opening sentence becomes the organizing image for everything that follows. Cities, careers, houses, governments, families, even the self itself. And the hut at the center of the book is not merely a shelter. It is a test. A question asked in architectural form. How little does a person truly need in order to live clearly? That's all for today on Libeth. One new book every week. At least we try.